So before we begin, I just want to talk about the supplies that I'm using. I bought this paint set, I believe for about $3 at the Dollar General. I want to say it was $3. It could have been five, but I I don't think it was that much. I've had it for a long time, about 2 years now, almost. So I don't know if you can still find these there, but I hope so. You can still find. I've seen these before at other places, so I know you can find them for relatively cheap. I'm also going to be using these Artist Loft brushes. These are relatively cheap as well. If you use these Artist Loft brands before, you might know they're not the highest of quality, but they are really great for watercolor, so I'm going to be using those as well. And then I have this little paper here is going to be my drawing that I will be transferring onto my sketchbook or into my sketchbook. I did this in Procreate and printed it out to the size I wanted it to fit in my sketchbook, and I will be using this charcoal, a box of Newports. It's just a box of charcoals I have, and the charcoal will be used for transferring the paper. So these are really all the supplies I'm going to be using today, and along with maybe some crayons and markers. But other than that, I'm still keeping it relatively cheap and inexpensive. But I'm going to show you how to use all these in just a moment. So to get started, I am just going through my sketchbook really quickly to show you some of the things I've been working on. I have mostly been using my sketchbook for product ideas, stickers, and style practice. But today I'm going to be doing another illustration. I really wanted to use watercolors, and I found these old watercolors that I had just laying around in a drawer, and I thought, oh, this would be perfect because I wanted my videos with the sketchbook and this entire sketchbook in general to be made with cheap art supplies, just to kind of show myself and others that you don't need expensive supplies to use or have a nice sketchbook, and you can do whatever you want with the sketchbook. But I started off by creating a drawing in Procreate. Well, actually, if you could tell a couple pages before, I actually sketched this out in my sketchbook. That's where I came up with the initial idea and thumbnail for it. Then I scanned it onto my iPad and I just drew in over it because I really wanted to only create the line art. I wanted the line art to be nice and clean so that when I was doing the transfer, there weren't too many mistakes, or I wouldn't have to eyeball it to make sure that it looks correct. I just know that it's right because I just traced over my own drawing. To transfer is relatively easy. You just cover the back with some charcoal and then tape it over the front, drawing side up, and trace over it with a pencil. And that should transfer the charcoal to the paper behind it. It's a really simple process, it's easy, and it's actually kind of fun because you get to lift the paper up and see the results, and it leaves this very soft, like almost pastel type of pencil look in the line art. So I think it's really great for watercolors, especially if you have a heavy hand like me and you draw very hard. Doing it this way just allows you to have a nice light, not too dark drawing, but relatively dark enough so you can still see the drawing while you're painting it. And the process is a little time consuming versus just sketching out your own illustration onto the paper, because you can totally do that. You don't have to transfer it like this. You can just eyeball it if that works for you. I've done that plenty of times when I just don't feel like doing all this extra work, but I find this way helps keep your drawing consistent with the original reference image that you're going to be using. I guess another thing to note is sometimes when you are doing this process, I don't know if you noticed, but it is all in pink, the line art, the reference, I guess. And that is because I wanted to be able to see my pencil while I'm tracing it. So I recommend if you are going to do this, definitely use a lighter color, like a much lighter color, so your pencil will show through. I also recommend using a dull pencil, where the tip is nice and kind of worn and very flat almost. That allows you to have thicker lines within the transfer itself, and so it leaves a more solid and consistent line. Because I notice if you have a sharper pencil, then the pencil is eventually going to get dull as you're drawing or tracing, and so you're going to have some spots that have lighter lines and some spots that have darker lines. So a dull pencil kind of ensures that you have consistent lines throughout the drawing. And don't be like me and waste washi tape. I did not need to put that much tape down. It wasn't until I was putting the last piece of tape that I realized I put too much. I just needed enough tape to hold the drawing in place and not move around or shift around while I'm drawing, because that will smear the charcoal across the paper. So yeah, just don't do that. I would recommend using regular tape instead. I just had washi tape. That's all I really had on hand. I'm also not really worried about having borders. I knew this drawing was going to be smaller than my actual sketchbook, and I kind of wanted that. I wanted to kind of test myself on being able to have a more control over the brush and have better skill when it comes to doing like a freehand illustration and not worrying about, having too many straight lines or it being too perfect. And I think it turned out all right. You can really only tell that the right side is it bled a little bit outwards, but I think that's fine. As for my color choices, I really wanted to do a fall themed drawing or painting in this aspect. I wanted to use warm colors like oranges, reds, yellows, and I wanted it to feel like just a cozy little image. But I didn't really have anything planned while going in. Like when it comes to colors, I didn't plan the colors out. I really just went along with whatever I felt worked, and I just carefully placed the colors down, testing out what I liked, what I didn't like. And again, I'm using really cheap watercolors, so some tips that I have is when you're laying down these watercolors, try not, and this is actually a tip for any watercolor use, but if you're trying to fill in a large gap, do not go back over the colors you just laid down, because that'll create a texture within the color and you'll get that kind of muddy look. And you'll kind of see it if I go back a couple times over some of the wet paint. It leaves a just undesired effect. But of course that's different from adding colors in to blend it together, which is using a wet technique. This is just to fill in a solid color and without too many dark spots in it. Just use it continuously, all in one go. Don't go back over your lines. Another thing I'm keeping in mind is, because I'm using kind of wet on wet technique. Well, I'm sorry, that's wrong. I'm not using wet on wet. I'm just using a wet brush over still drying watercolor. So the other colors that are beside it are still wet, and that causes the colors to bleed together. I am not worrying too much about that, because I am going to go over it with a marker later to outline it, and once you outline it, that kind of solves the issue of the very light bleeding effect that it has. And it's very subtle. It's, usually you just lay down a color and you have them, and you can kind of see where they just sort of blend in together. So I just think at the end, when you finish your drawing, if you really want to make those pieces stand out, just go over it with like a marker or a lining pencil, or just really anything to separate them, and you should be fine. I think mistakes are something that I have grown to kind of embrace over time. When you draw enough, you realize that there's really no precious drawings. You just draw what you make and then you move on to the next piece, even though those pieces can take weeks or years or months, days. It could take a long time to finish a piece and you can grow attached to it. That doesn't mean that it has to be without mistakes. It doesn't mean that you're any less of an artist when you continue to make mistakes, even though you've been learning. Because with each piece, you're going to learn something new. And with each piece, by learning something new, you probably will mess up, because we often learn from problems. We come up with solutions to things that are a puzzle in our head. So really, I don't even see a mistake as more of a learning opportunity. That's how I try to see it. You know, if something kind of, oh, these colors are overlapping, or maybe the perspective's a little uneven, maybe, you know, the colors just don't look good together. I think there's always a way to fix these little things, and I think the way to do it is by allowing yourself to let go of those initial ideas of what you originally had in mind, because you're never going to be able to draw what you have in your head fully. So by assuming that you messed up a piece because it's not the way it is and you planned it out to be, that's okay, because maybe it's an opportunity for you to learn something new. It's an opportunity for you to learn how to overcome this problem and find a solution for it. So going in with this yellow for the background outside the window, I was not expecting it to be that yellow. And something to keep in mind with these watercolors, or really most watercolors, is they dry much lighter than they are. Not all of them are like that. Some hold the pigment, but these usually dry a little bit lighter. I just wasn't expecting that yellow, but I thought last second that, oh, this is a perfect way to complement the rest of the drawing. You know, the trees were originally going to be a much lighter shades of orange, and now that they're darker shades because I wanted it to stand out from the yellow, I find that it kind of helped the initial idea that I was going with in the first place. Once I'm done with all of the colors or laying down the flats, I just go in and sort of correct little mistakes that I've made and maybe want to over or draw over. Again, another thing about mistakes is, again, you can fix them. Just because there's a mistake doesn't mean you need to leave it. In this case, I noticed I didn't paint some of the colors correctly between the background and the bunny, so I just went over it with some green, and I went with a darker green because I was moving on to the shadow or shading process anyways. And I just took it as an opportunity to start doing and adding a little bit of shading here and there to that greenery, as well as, you know, filling out the little spots that I missed, and just fixing little things here and there. But for the most part, I leave most things alone and I just continue on. And I think it's a lot of trusting the process, and hoping that everything will turn out the way you want it to. And so sorry, drawing this little guy was so tricky. He was so tiny, and when I went to draw his shorts, the blue immediately bled in with the other blue that I had just painted, because I was too impatient to wait for it to dry. And so it has this kind of like blotchy effect, but I didn't let that get to me. I just kind of went with it, and I thought maybe it'll make a dress. But once it dried, I think I still turned it into a shirt once I got to the marker process, which is now, and I'm glad because I could talk about a little bit about doing this marker line art. I initially thought I was going to use some Crayolas with this, and now that I finished it, I kind of wish I had, but I like using the markers to do line art over it, and I like it because it really makes the rest of the drawing pop out. I thought about doing line art with the watercolor, but I realized that would just take up too much of my time, and I would stress out if the watercolors just weren't working with me, because sometimes that can happen. And it's not necessarily the brand, as more of how much, keeping conscious of how much water is on the brush and how much paint you have on the brush. I think it's just a lot of work, where the markers make it easier to quickly and just draw the lines as fast as I need to. If you saw my last video, you know I don't really like to spend too much time on one part of the drawing. I like to move on quickly so that I can just get to whatever I want to work on next. Of course, I always try to give things time, but sometimes I think it's just more beneficial to get something done and out of the way so you don't have to worry about it anymore. Line art comes to me relatively quickly, so I know it's going to be the fastest thing I can work on. The only tricky part with line art is that when you start to work fast, or if you do work too fast to get things done, you have a higher chance of messing up. And I don't care too much about that again, so it's not a problem. But if you are somebody who really can't stand having wonky line art and you like all your lines to look consistent, then it is gonna take a lot longer. But I think in the end that's always worth it, because as an artist who draws really fast and I don't like spending too much time on something, I just know that if I were to spend my time and go a little slower, that my drawing would improve drastically, because I have tested it many times where I draw something and then I draw it again and I take my time on it, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to get better results over a slower piece. But again, it's a matter of your preference. If you like a piece you want it to look more perfect, you want your lines to be more crisp, you want the coloring to be in the lines, and you don't want wonky lines, you know, you want straight lines, you want symmetry, that is okay, as long as you're okay with taking time. And you have to be comfortable with spending a long time on a drawing to get those results, because unless you are just very, very good at drawing without references or a sketch or, you know, a thumbnail beforehand, you can just go straight onto a canvas, then, you know, that's awesome. But I know for a lot of people, sometimes you have to have time and you have to have references and you have to get all your things together before you can even start the drawing. And then it's, you know, it's a long process, but it's always worth it in the end, because in the end your drawing is going to show through. And your drawing will show how much work and effort you put into it and how much time we put into it. Just like I've put a lot of time into this video, and it is time to go now. I hope you enjoyed it. I am kind of in a rush with this one just because I'm recording it last minute before I have to go to work. And I know that's maybe not the best idea, but I still had fun making this video. I hope you liked it. I hope you got some tips from me, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take it easy and stay safe. Thank you for watching.